Hey guys, this is Carl at Technical Enduro Skills Training School. Today's video is pretty exciting. We'll be looking at the tips and tricks that we've learned over the years, being supported by ex-factory mechanics, ex-pro riders during some of the events that we've done. We won't be focusing on the sort of the elite factory pro level stuff like remapping ECUs and internal gearbox changes. Although that stuff is certainly possible for privateers, it requires a decent amount of investment. And doesn't always yield the same kind of results compared to when the factory mechanics do that and change the engine's characteristics to match a particular pro's riding preference. We'll be looking at the things that improve the bike's rideability as well as the bike's reliability. And a lot of the stuff that we'll be talking about may not be common knowledge everywhere, so we really hope that the content of the video helps you set your bike up better. We can't take credit for a lot of the tips and tricks in this video. We learned these things from people far more experienced than ourselves. People like Zippy and Patsy at Desert Road Racing, who looked after us during Romaniacs. Alfie Cox, who looked after us during the Roof of Africa. People who we've done riding days with, like Paul Bolton, David Knight, and those guys. Julian Stevens, who does my suspension, who also used to work with a lot of the pro riders over the years, as well as the guys who did this bike for me, Eurotech KTM, Jacko, Nick, Robbo, all of those guys. Eurotech also support some of the factory guys, so they really know what they're talking about when they give advice on how to set the bikes up, not only for reliability, but gearing, etc. So yeah, we hope you enjoy the video. If you've got any good ideas that we haven't mentioned, by all means, send us a note or put it down in the comments, and we'll try and make a video about it or add anything to the list. All right, hope you enjoy the video. Okay, let's look at the controls. So the first thing is the throttle. So in your spares box, you get two throttle cams. One is a quick turn, one is a slow turn. You'll use the slow turn throttle cam when you are looking for grip, low grip situations like really steep off cambers, muddy races, or even when there's been some sort of heavy rain at your local track. It slows down the throttle response a little bit because the quick throttle a bit better when you go to faster tracks with high grip. You want to be a bit more aggressive. You're going to hit some jumps and that sort of stuff. The next thing we'll look at is some of us make these little elastic bits and wrap them around the two master cylinders. It allows you to store things underneath them because you can just grab them, lift them up, and tuck something underneath. We often put a time card under there so that it's easily accessible, or the time card goes in the seat pouch. The other stuff that some of the pros do is they put energy gels and so forth under these that they can just quickly access and grab them as they go. Another thing that a lot of people don't know is some guys change the master cylinder on the clutch side to lighten the clutch. So KTM's, most of them, there are some, most of them come out the 300 EXEs with a 10mm clutch master cylinder. You can see it's a 10mm by turning it upside down and looking underneath. There's a little number stamped on the bottom of the master cylinder. If it's a 10, it means you've got a 10mm piston inside. If you want to really lighten up the clutch, you buy the 9mm cylinder from their product catalog. The 9mm is used on some of the KTM range. I think it's the KTM 150s and some of the 4-strokes. What the 9mm clutch master does is it lightens up the clutch a little bit, and I feel it stretches out the clutch bite point a little bit. So it gives you just that tiny bit more feel and control as you're using it. At the same time, some guys also switch the brake master cylinder the opposite way. So I believe the standard one is a 9mm. They go to a 10mm. Some of the factory guys use a 10mm because it moves more fluid. So the front brake switches on quicker, and you know, you can apply more pressure. The other thing people do is they run grip tape or cloth handlebar tape around the levers. It gives the lever a bit more feel. In the winter time, the lever isn't so cold on your fingers through the gloves. And when it's really messy, really muddy, they sometimes run grip tape that they stick on the outside of the lever. So that's a pretty good tip. I really like that. The other thing people do is they take PTFE Teflon tape, and they take the brake master and the clutch master off. They wrap a little bit of PTFE tape on the handlebar itself and then refit. What this does is in a crash, if you're not running the full wraparound levers, it allows your lever to turn on the bar rather than often break the lever or break the clutch perch. So that is a good tip. PTFE tape underneath the clutch and brake masters on the handlebar. You'll find a Renthal 999 handlebar on a lot of pro riders' bikes. They like them because they're the lowest bar that Renthal makes. It allows you to be nice and forward over the bike, put more weight on the front wheel, and I also find in the corners when I'm leaning the bike over, it gives me the sense that I can apply more pressure on the outside bit of the handlebar, to sort of pushing the front wheel into the ground around corners. I have personally removed the crossbar. I did this in 2013. I've been running the bar ever since like that. I mainly did it then because I wanted to fit GPSs on the handlebar, and I've just left it that way. But I've also been told that by removing the crossbar, you actually make the bar a little bit more comfortable because you remove a tiny bit of stiffness out of it. Equally, I run the X-Trig triple clamps. The X-Trig triple clamps allow much better suspension movement than the stock triple clamps because the clamps are more round. There's a very good X-Trig video which I'll put in the comments below. Have a look at it. In my opinion, definitely a worthwhile investment here. And then to give yourself a little bit more comfort, the new KTMs are really good with their counterbalancer. There's hardly any vibration that comes out of it. But my X-Trigs came with the PHDS clamps. These just remove a little bit more vibration out of the bike, which just makes the bars a bit more comfortable to hold on to for when you're doing long days on the bike. I've mentioned this in another video, but what some of us do, this is also a common thing to do at the Roof of Africa, is you loosen off your top clamp bolts and your pinch bolt here, and you tighten your steering pinch nut a little bit so that it just puts a little bit of force on the front steering. It settles the bike down a little bit at speed, makes it less twitchy. I like it. The guys do it at Roof of Africa. It's sort of the poor man's steering damper, so to speak. So that's a very good thing to try, and it costs nothing. It's very easy to do. Something else you'll notice on some pros bikes, and I've done this myself. Certainly not something that's recommended by any manufacturer. And you do this at your own risk, but a lot of them remove the return side cable on the new TPI bikes. It lightens the throttle significantly because there's less friction in the system. You don't have an additional cable pulling back. The spring inside the throttle body is quite strong, so it doesn't change how fast the throttle snaps back. In fact, I personally feel that when I do it, the throttle snaps back even easier. And so, I mean, you may not always know this because they sometimes remove just the inner cable inside, and they still run the two to make it look like they're both there. But a lot of them take that return cable out. Our buddy Yoram at 2Ride make nice little 3D printed plugs that plug up the hole here and plugs up the hole down at the throttle body. If you just want to get rid of this cable completely. That's probably worth doing because you can unscrew it here, unscrew it there, and you save your cable. You're not cutting anything and damaging anything. You can put it back if you don't like the feel of it, or you wanna sell the bike. Silly little thing, but you'll notice a stopwatch on a lot of people's bikes. I use a stopwatch really for when I train. I know how long I'm doing laps for, etc., but also in places like Romania, Bulgaria, when you're doing the long day out, they'll often give you an expected riding time that you need to keep in mind when you're racing, and the stopwatch helps you keep track of that. Another thing you'll notice on a lot of expert and pro riders is they remove the outside shroud screws, and they use some spare side stand rubbers that they run across here, and this sort of holds the shroud in place. But if trees or something grabs the shroud and it pulls the shroud, first of all, it doesn't damage the radiator and it doesn't rip your shroud clean off. The other thing you can do is you can replace the screws with cable ties. Just make sure it's the sort of cable tie that can easily break in the case where this shroud is yanked or pulled by a tree or a log or something like that. You'll find a lot of pro riders and experts ride with foot pegs that are non-standard. They often like a foot peg that sits a little bit lower and a little bit backwards. That is something I think out of the trials world, where foot pegs are actually located much further back and much closer to the rear wheel. What it does is it allows you, when you're weighting the peg, to sort of get closer to the rear wheel, and so you can put just that little bit of extra force down onto the rear wheel nearer the rear axle to generate a little bit more grip. It can be good, it can be bad. In some cases with a lower foot peg you can get the feeling that you get hung up on ruts a little bit more, and so you will see riders changing back and forth based on the track conditions and how they feel they want to ride that particular day. You get lots of commercially available lowered foot pegs from you can buy them from Raptor, which is a UK-based company that make probably the best titanium pegs out there. An American company called Fastway. They make this is the new Evo 4 foot peg. They come with what they call a flip chip. This allows you to run the chip in the bottom at standard position, or turn the chip to the top to move the foot peg further down and back. I've not had the best luck with these because I have managed to break 2 foot peg pins due to the design of this particular flip chip, and so I'll probably go to the Raptor foot pegs sometime soon. The other thing you'll see is the slightly larger Enduro engineering rear brake tip. We run the brake tip a little bit higher than the foot pegs so that you can easily access it when standing up, as well as when you're hanging off the back of the bike. And then what the Enduro engineering brake tip allows you to do is move it a little bit backwards. Guys that do a lot of riding more so on the balls of their feet feel that they can access the rear brake easier to do that. So that's something that you see a lot of the pro guys do. And riding on the balls of your feet is good because you're adding a little bit of suspension to the bike, especially through some really rough stuff. And so being able to move the position of the rear brake tip is very handy. When it comes to front suspension, obviously the cream of the crop is the cone valves. I would say the only thing to be aware of is that they require a little bit more maintenance than other forks. So that's why they're better suited at sort of the pro rider with factory mechanic support. They're a fantastically safe fork that work unbelievably well at speed and taking hard hits. Very safe fork to ride at speed with. The only complaint is they can maybe feel a little bit harsh to guys who ride sort of clubman trail speed. I don't personally use the standard Explorer forks. I found that they have a habit of diving under hard braking conditions. The compression damper needs work, so there are a bunch of companies that'll do aftermarket kits that they'll fit, that'll help with the compression damping characteristics of the fork. Me and a lot of my friends run the closed cartridge WP forks from the old motocross bikes. We revalve those for Enduro, and we love them. They're incredibly reliable. If you get hold of an older set, be aware they may have the largest spindle feet fitted, and so you may need some adapters to make your more modern bike fit those feet, or you've got to replace the feet, which is about £150 investment to do that. But definitely a valid way to go. You take your stock forks off, you put them in a garage, you run your personalized forks, and then when you're ready to move your bike on, you put the stock forks back on, and these go onto your next bike. They've already been set up for you. You're used to how they work. It's one less thing you need to worry about on the new bike, so definitely worth considering. As something to keep in mind when you're fitting pro level suspension, cone valve forks are a little bit longer, about 18 millimeters longer than stock forks, and so they will have an effect on raising the front up. This is very, very good if you're riding at expert and pro level speed, because it makes the bike more stable at speed. But it can feel a bit washy in turns for guys who ride at sort of clubman level or trail speed. So that's something to be aware of. The other thing is track shocks used to be a little bit lower, 4 millimeters shorter than a PDS shock. That had the effect of lowering the rear end a little bit. Nowadays, the Trax shocks, I believe, are the same length as the PDS and Link shocks on the Link bikes. So it doesn't do that standard anymore. But a lot of guys still do lower the rear end. I've seen some pro bikes where they've actually cut the subframe and moved the subframe down. I believe predominantly so that they can get purchased with their feet in really technical terrain. You'll notice on a lot of pro bikes, they run special coatings on their fork legs. This is a DLC coating. It's very, very slippery, very, very hard. It reduces stiction in the suspension stroke. Stiction is the biggest enemy of well-performing suspension, and so the more slippery you can make your suspension, your fork legs, as well as your rear shock shaft, the better your suspension will work, especially the better the small bump feel and absorption will be. And then the additional tip is you do get some compounds. This is one that is made by Bruno. It was developed in combination with RockShox, a very well-known manufacturer of suspension for mountain bikes. It's an extremely slippery coating. You spray this on your leg, on the fork leg, you bounce it up and down a little bit, and it coats the fork leg, makes it even more slippery than just the DLC coating on its own. So a lot of the guys will prepare the bike using suspension coating as well as some of the harder surface coatings that they'll use. When it comes to suspension, Julian Stevens does my suspension. He's got a company called 666 Suspension Services. I have to say the work that Julian does to the rear shock is unbelievable. It's the best I've felt and come across. What he does is he machines his own super lightweight and low friction piston that he fits into the reservoir. It replaces the stock plastic sort of composite piston that's in there. It has less stiction, and it really improves the small bump sensitivity of the rear shock. He also revalves the rear shock, and because I do a lot of extreme and technical riding, I'm 6 foot, but I still fit a 5mm spacer inside the rear shock. The 5mm spacer has very nearly a 20mm height impact at the rear wheel. And also now, because the shaft sits slightly higher in the shock body, what Julian will do is he cuts down the bump stop and he revalves it so that it works in the appropriate suspension range. One of the other things he does to remove as much stiction from the rear shock is polish the rear shaft. You can have the rear shaft DLC coated. All of that helps with an ultra smooth and an ultra reliable rear shock. I highly recommend sending your suspension to Julian. Quick turnaround. Yeah, he does a really good job. Something you'll notice on a lot of pro bikes is they fit a Samco thermostat hose bypass kit. These are higher quality silicon based hoses, stronger, more reliable than the stock hoses, but the main reason they do it is to get rid of all of this. This is the standard sort of thermostat flow. You can see that some of the pipes are significantly narrower and there's a lot of bends in the flow. So what the Samco kit does is it increases flow because the hoses are virtually straight. What a lot of mechanics also do is they will look at where hoses may be exposed. If it's a really rough race where damage is very likely, they will actually cut the old hoses and wrap them around the existing hoses to provide double protection, or use some really thick inner tube, cut pieces of that, wrap it around the tube and cable tie it on to provide additional protection for some of the more exposed hoses, 4 strokes, etc. You'll notice on some pros bikes they remove the steering stop bolt completely. Just be careful because your fork can hit your radiator, or in some cases your triple clamp can actually damage the frame. What I've done on this bike is I've taken the bolt out, removed the nut, cut the bolt shorter, and then put the bolt back in. You have to cut the bolts shorter because if you leave them standard length, they actually touch in the middle, and so they need to be shorter for you to be able to get it all the way in. But what this does is it drastically improves the maneuverability of the bike at low speed, because you get much more turning lock, and so you can ride much tighter circles if you're doing pivot turns and you're trying to get around little trees and things and off cambers and things like that. On the faster races though, I think people will turn them back out again to limit the steering lock that much, so that they don't get any sort of very high speed twitches that become very, very bad and uncontrollable. The other thing you'll also find on pros bikes, and also guys that are used to riding in really muddy and wet conditions, is they fit grip tape. So they buy scooter or skateboard grip tape, and they tend to put it on the panels here, so that their legs have got some more purchase on the bike. We have on occasion also had grip tape here. When you're doing pivot turns, the inside of the leg grabs the plastics and holds the bike better for the pivot turn. It's something that you'll have to experiment with and find a patch or a size that works for you based on your ability level, your skill level. Another thing you'll see a lot on pro and expert level guys' bikes is lock wire. So a lot of mechanics use lock wire to secure any potential screws that come loose. We certainly lock wire our brake pins in place so that they don't accidentally come off. A lot of guys also lock wire the spokes. It keeps them together. If ever one works loose, that spoke doesn't fall out and destroy the wheel, and so forth. So it's a worthwhile thing to go around your bike and find the little bits that can fall off or be pulled off during a race, and just stick a bit of lock wire on to secure them in place. Some factory mechanics also very occasionally run injector cleaner through the system. They also used to do this on the carburetor bikes, especially in very wet conditions. The injector cleaner actually prevents water from sitting in the float bowl, and so that is something that is still being done today. You'll also notice on a lot of the prepared bikes that they switch the foot peg pin around and they run it from the bottom up through. That is to reduce the possibility of the split pin wearing underneath and falling out. It's a far more reliable way to run your foot peg pin this way around. A lot of factory pros and expert riders run solid rear discs, especially in the winter in the mud. This is not a solid rear disc. This one has got the holes in it, but the effect of a solid rear disc is it makes the braking more reliable during winter. What happens is in the winter, mud gets into these holes and they end up forcing the pads apart. And this means that you've got to pump the rear brake lever to get your braking back. And so solid rear discs, especially in thick mud, absolutely the way to go for reliable braking. The other thing that people do is, especially pros, they run Castrol SRF racing brake fluid in the braking system. It is a .4 fluid, but it's a very, very high quality racing brake fluid. It raises the dry boiling point up to 320 degrees, which is, I believe, the highest that you can get. When they're doing hard braking or when they're doing incredibly long extreme downhills, the brake system does heat up quite a lot, and it could have the effect of the brakes fading by fluid boiling. The one drawback of Castrol SRF, well, apart from the fact that it's quite expensive, it's about £60 for a litre, is the fact that it needs replacing far more regularly than normal brake fluid, and so that is worth keeping an eye on. You can run .5.1. .5.1's dry boiling point is about 270 degrees, so it's about 50 degrees less than Castrol SRF. That is probably your next best option. .4 and .5.1 are glycol-based brake fluids, so they are compatible with each other. Really, the only difference between the two is the dry boiling point differences. .4 is 230 degrees, and so 5.1 seems to be sort of the newer standard that everybody is going for. An often overlooked little tip is the fact that KTM supplies a shorter bolt that fits into your side stand. It's very easy. It normally comes with a brand new bike. It's very easy to fit. You just undo the standard bolt with the spacer that comes on the bike. You fit the shorter bolt. That means that your side stand clips into place and stays down. Another quick tip from Julian Stevens is, if you're going to continue using a split link in your chain, then the best thing is to flip it around. So take it out, push it through from this end, and put the split link on the inside of the chain. It wears significantly less on the inside of the chain than on the outside of the chain, and so your split link becomes much more reliable. That's it. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you learned something, you like what you saw, please subscribe to the channel. I will endeavor to do some more videos. If you've got some ideas that you want to give us, by all means, put them down in the comments.